Genuine Snake Oil by Brighton M. Tietz. Narration by Joe Jeffrey. Another chunk splintered from the worn wooden wheel, causing the small cart to limp as it crept down the path, its progress hindered by the unforgiving terrain. Elias, restless in his seat, followed the trajectory of the shards as they disappeared in the snow. With a resigned sigh, his attention shifted back to the path ahead. "You doing all right, Geo?" he asked gently. Geo shook his massive head as he let out a loud grunt, flakes falling from his snow-clung beard. "We're almost there," Elias replied, his breath escaping invisible puffs that mingled with the winter's air. "Just up ahead." He leaned forward in his seat, pushing the mound of snow from atop Geo's shell. His jaw quivered as the winter air slithered into his coat, redness creeping across his skin, only revealing itself through the tears in his clothes. Abruptly, the cart jolted to a halt, nearly sending Elias tumbling from his seat. "Whoa, what's going on, Geo? You hear something?" Geo stared into the barren, white forest, his grunts dampened by the thick blanket of snow. The two sat in silence, both fixated on the seemingly endless wood. The frigid air curled around Elias's fingers, prompting him to quickly lift his reins, breaking the silence. "I don't see anything. Let's go," he stuttered. Geo let out a long, low grunt, his breath wafting into the air. With deliberate slowness, he began to shuffle forward, his massive shell plowing through the blanket of snow. Through the blinding white, an outline began appearing in the distance. As they grew closer, the massive log walls of Fort Rawlins stretched towards the flake-filled sky. Geo slowly came to a stop in front of the gate. Elias surveyed the imposing structure. Its walls stood tall and sturdy, creating a stark contrast against the winter landscape. Rubbing his hands together, he slowly climbed from the cart, his boots submerging into the powder. He slowly shuffled his way towards the gate. As he approached, he gently pressed his hand against the cold, stripped logs. He stood in silence before glancing to the side. Something had caught his eye. A large bell was hanging near the right side of the gate, a pull cord dangling within arm's reach. Elias moved closer to inspect the bell, his glance shifting towards Geo. "Think anyone's home?" he asked with a smile, his lips chapped from the air. Without hesitation, he stretched his arm out, firmly grasping the pull cord. As hard as he could, he pulled it, allowing the bell's ring to break the silent air. Elias stood there for a moment, the echoes of the bell fading into the distance. Stepping back, he strained to look to the sky, the flurry of flakes causing his eyes to flicker. He squinted as a golden light slowly faded into view upon the wall. The silhouette of a man formed within the cloud of white, the flicker of his lantern fighting against the natural light. "State your business," the man shouted, holding the lantern out over the edge, its glow revealing the figures of Elias and Geo. "My name is Elias Deerdruff," he shouted in response. "I'm a traveling doctor with a cart full of medicines. I'm here to help whoever I can and hopefully make a little money in the process." The man paused for a moment as he glanced at the two, eyeing them up and down. "A medicine man?" he asked. Elias nodded. The man sighed, pondering for a moment before shaking his head. "I'm sorry. You'll have to take your snake oil somewhere else," he replied. A look of disappointment stretched across Elias's face. "I assure you, sir, I don't sell snake oil. These medicines are genuine," his voice stuttered. He quickly rushed to his cart, unclipping a chest strapped to his side. Upon opening it, he carefully pulled out a small glass jar. "Given this weather, I'm sure you have sick people inside. If you would just let me in—" "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't," the man interrupted. "We have very few rations, and too many people as it is. We don't have room for a snake oil salesman and his beast." The man motioned for the two to leave. Before Elias could reply, the man turned from them, the golden flame of his lantern disappearing into the flurry. Elias sighed as he slowly walked back to his cart. He stopped in front of Geo and began to wipe the snow from atop his armored head. "I'm sorry, pal. Maybe the next one," he mumbled. Geo let out a light grumble. Elias smiled before reaching beneath Geo's head, scratching his chin. Elias sniffed as he returned the small jar to his cart's chest, shutting and relatching it before climbing back into his seat. This wasn't the first time this had happened, the first instance of being turned away. Being a traveling doctor in this day and age was nearly impossible, not due to the lack of patience, but because of the prevalence of dishonesty. The world was flooded with men claiming to be the real deal, asserting that their elixirs and potions could heal any and all ailments. It didn't take a genius to see through the veil of these lies. Unfortunately, because of these so-called medicine men and the lies they spread, genuine practitioners who actually cared about the health and well-being of people often found themselves suffering. Elias tended to look on the bright side of things, but deep down he held a pure anger towards those men. Too many times had the two been turned away. Too many times had people lost their lives simply because he wasn't allowed to treat them. The frustration and sorrow lingered, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. Too many times, indeed. "Well, the next closest town's about a day's ride south. I feel that's our best option," Elias mumbled to himself. He flexed his hands before picking up the reins. Geo let out a loud, low grunt before starting to turn the cart. "Careful now," Elias stated. "This wheel has to last us until we can afford a new one." Geo responded with an attitude-filled grunt as he continued to turn the cart. As the cart finished its rotation, Geo returned to the road. This time felt easier. Instead of plowing through snow, he could walk within the trail he had already blazed. Elias stared into the expansive wilderness. He was hoping they would have a safe place to sleep for the night, but the rejection at the gate meant they were going to have to travel in the dark. He despised traveling in the dark. He turned to look over his shoulder, the shape of Fort Rawlins, fading into the snowfall. The further down the road they went, the more the snowfall ceased. All that remained was the endless silence within the dark abyss of the trees. As the snow ceased, the winds began to blow. Geo sniffed the air, his eyes widening as he quickly halted. He could smell something upwind. "What is it, Geo? What's wrong?" Elias questioned, his voice filled with nerves. Geo began grunting frantically as he attempted to back up, causing the cart to begin tipping backwards. Whoa, calm down, it's all right," Elias demanded. Geo nervously glanced into the forest, sensing that whatever was out there was most certainly watching them. Elias climbed from his seat, reopening the wooden chest strapped to the cart, out of which he retrieved a long cloth. He carried it back to his seat and placed the cloth upon his lap, lifting the fold and revealing a rifle wrapped within. He then stood in his cart, staring into the darkness, his hands gripping the gun's cold metal. Thoughts rushed through his head. He wasn't a carnivore hunter. not like his father before him, and the rifle in his hands felt unfamiliar. He couldn't remember the last time this rifle had been fired. Suddenly a thought came to him, a memory. His father had taught him, if he ever came face to face with a carnivore, to make it known that you are aware of its presence. He raised the gun above his head, and after a moment's hesitation, he let out a primal scream. His shouts echoed through the forest, cascading from tree to tree. Geo began bellowing along with him, their combined roars taking physical form in the frozen air. "Get out of here!" he shouted. "We know you're here!" After nearly screaming himself hoarse, the two stood in tense silence. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to movement in the darkness. The moonlight glinted in the beast's eyes as its massive form emerged onto the road ahead, its clawed feet sinking into the snow. "Carnotaurus," Elias stuttered, his voice now filled with rasp. The beast let out a quick, low rumble as it fixated on them, especially Geo. Elias swallowed hard as he slowly bent down in his cart, reaching for the ropes that secured Geo's harness. His trembling hands meticulously loosened the knots. Geo, sensing the shift, understood what was about to transpire. Running was not an option. "All right, Geo. Be careful," Elias cautioned, his voice tense. As the rope slipped from Geo's harness, he cautiously stepped forward. The beast observed attentively as Geo raised his shell from the ground, emitting huffs and puffs in an attempt to convey an air of intimidation. The Carno responded with a long, low grunt. His feet slowly shuffled towards them. Seeing this, Geo lifted his tail, arching it as far as he could behind him, revealing the menacing bony protrusions. Elias shakingly raised his rifle. He had very few bullets and didn't wish to waste them. The Carno stretched out its vestigial arms as its eyes trained on Geo. It began shaking its massive head, showing off its formidable bony protrusions. Geo let out a loud bellow. The Carno followed suit. Elias's finger tightened around the trigger. This was an action very unfamiliar to him. The Carnotaurus began huffing faster and faster, as if he was attempting to hype himself up. With an ear-shattering roar, he charged forward. Elias could feel the thunderous vibrations of its footsteps coursing through the cart. As the Carno approached, Geo quickly pivoted, unleashing his massive tail towards the oncoming beast. The Carnotaurus, with a hair's breadth to spare, managed to evade the impending collision. After gaining its balance, the beast roared yet again, its primal echoes reverberating. However, this time Geo wasn't its primary target. Its eyes gleaming with an eerie moonlit glow fixated on the cart. With remarkable swiftness, the beast launched into its second charge. Elias, unable to divert its gaze, found himself ensnared in a fierce, unyielding stare from the creature, its eyes penetrating deep into his soul. Elias closed his eyes, his finger twitching within the trigger guard. He opened his eyes and, in a moment of pure adrenaline, he leapt from the cart, just narrowly avoiding the beast's massive jaws. He could feel the rushing wind from the creature's snapping maw just inches behind him. As he hit the ground, his face became caked with snow, causing him to gasp for air. In frustration, the beast released an ear-shattering roar, its cry abruptly silenced when Geo rammed into its side with his armored head, sending it crashing into the cart. In a moment of pure fear, Elias swiftly crawled beneath the tattered cart. Lying on his back, he squeezed his eyes shut, the thunderous clash of behemoths filling his ears. The snow seeped through his jacket, chilling his back to numbness. The surrounding noise escalated until, abruptly, silence enveloped him. Breathing heavily, he slowly opened his eyes. Carefully, he crawled into the open. Struggling to his feet, Elias squinted in the darkness. No sign of Geo or the beast remained. Only the blood-soaked snow. "Geo, where are you?" he stuttered. Slowly circling the cart, a glint caught his eye. His rifle. He quickly rushed over to pick it up. Scooping it from the snow, he wiped the powder from the side, revealing his father's initials. "I'm sorry, Dad. I couldn't do it," he mumbled, tears forming in his eyes. A noise came from the trees, drawing his attention. Out from the shadows it came. The beast. It was breathing heavily. Geo had fought well. It meandered toward him, saliva dripping from beneath its dagger-like teeth. Elias made eye contact with the beast. His grip tightened around the rifle. The beast began to huff as it came closer and closer. Elias lifted the rifle, his finger wrapped around the trigger. "Not this time," he whispered. His finger pulled tighter and tighter. A loud bellow shattered the silence, causing them both to turn their heads. Elias's eyes widened. "Geo!" he screamed. The beast shifted its attention to Geo. With another bellow, Geo charged, forcing the Carno to step back. Geo rammed his armored head against the beast's belly, the creature snapping its jaws at his back. Despite multiple attempts, the Carno couldn't breach Geo's thick shell. Geo shoved the beast, then with a swift pivot, swung his mighty tail. A loud crack echoed as his tail struck the Carno's leg, causing it to collapse into the snow. The two watched the beast in silence as it shakily stood. Elias lifted his rifle above his head, then began to scream. Geo joined in with yet another bellow. The beast began to back away, blood dripping from its leg. It turned and began walking back into the woods. The two continued blasting their primal screams as the limping Carno disappeared into the trees. Both stood in silence as their screams faded into the distance. Breathing heavily, Elias turned towards Geo. "You did it," he chuckled, limping closer. Geo released a low rumble as Elias placed his hand beneath his chin. He recoiled as Elias's fingers pressed the newly made gash upon his throat. "Whoa, Geo, whoa," Elias comforted. "Let's get that cleaned up." Elias quickly unclipped the chest on his cart and removed 2 small jars and a rag. Using his teeth, he uncorked one of the bottles, tipping it onto the rag. He slowly shuffled towards Geo. "This is going to sting a little," he muttered. He gently pressed the rag against the wound, causing Geo to let out a pained grunt as Elias began wiping the gash. After a moment, he placed the bottle along with the bloody rag on the cart's shelf as he began unscrewing the second jar. Using 2 fingers, he scraped a thick, see-through gel from inside. He carefully smeared the gel over the wound. "You ready to keep going?" he asked. Geo let out a loud rumble as he began backing up to the cart. Elias threw the straps over Geo's back, tightening them around his shell. "All right, let's get moving," he stuttered. Elias shakily climbed into his seat, his heart still beating out of his chest. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before picking up the reins. "Next stop, Fort Rawlins," he mumbled. Gio let out a boisterous groan as the ropes tightened around him. The cart began limping again. The icy wind continued to blow as the two faded into the forest.